Thank you, Chris. Thank you, everybody who did service. Thank you, everybody, for coming back again. Some familiar faces from the past few weeks. So thank you for bearing with me. Good to see some old friends as well. Chris, every week I sort of pick up on something else on the script because I hadn't read it before. We started doing these, and this time what I picked up on was you saying, as more of us complete the steps and take on service roles, it's essential that we understand the traditions. It's not wonderful. And I guess to us in this group, because this is the way we've always kind of worked, and we're not on our own. Proper sponsorship lineages that do AA properly, and I say properly without apology, will take folks through the steps, at the end of which you then take them through the traditions, at the end of which you take them through the concepts. Pretty straightforward, isn't it? And have you heard this kind of the group's asked me to be the GSR, so I better go and learn the traditions kind of a thing? I always thought that one to be quite odd. What's worse than that I've heard more often is get into general service so you can then learn the traditions. Fucking hell. Like, that's a tricky one. It's like the surgeon, the would-be surgeon being handed the scalpel and being told it'd be okay, just cut some stuff up. You'll eventually figure out how to actually perform surgery on somebody. It doesn't make any sense to me that you would learn the discipline after being appointed the job. Yeah, my daughter was applying for a job recently, and she sent me through her CV, and I'm a bit of a salesman, but by the time I'd finished redoing her CV, she was the most qualified person I'd ever seen, and then she sort of looked at that and went, "Yeah, but I need to do the job if I actually get it." And okay, I'll scale that down a bit. But it's kind of the same thing for me. This kind of nonsense of joining the AA service structure and making an absolute turd of it because you're there to learn whenever you're actually supposed to be there to serve. Is that fair enough? And I guess if the takeaway from this workshop is that the 12 traditions of Alcoholics Anonymous are for the group member, and the group member will benefit from the traditions, and subsequently the groups that those members are a part of will benefit, then that's probably the best takeaway of all. Because what I thought is that you only need to learn the traditions if you take on a service role that would require that you have the traditions. On week one, we talked about that part from the service manual that was discussing concept 9 on the conversation, or the point of leadership, and it was talking about how all of the sponsors are leaders. So what is a sponsor? How is a sponsor defined? It's someone who has had a spiritual experience or a spiritual awakening as the result of working the 12 steps. That's it. So in Belfast Recover Group, we have people who are working the 12 steps, and we've got recovered folks who sponsor. So every single one of those recovered folks is a leader. Every single one of them. By definition, according to the Alcoholics Anonymous literature, not according to my own personal viewpoints. And we'll go on to speak shortly about why my own personal viewpoints are completely irrelevant, much to my annoyance. You did say in your script as well, Chris, that we will be covering 2 traditions every week. You probably got me to agree to that whenever we discussed this at the start. Don't remember agreeing to that, but you probably got me to agree to it. Nonetheless, I may well fall short on that deliberately. So we'll see what happens. If there's time for 2, we'll do 2. Whenever we get to tradition 2, we will most definitely not be covering 2 traditions that night. We'll be spending probably a couple of weeks on tradition 2. So we'll see how that goes. All right, so a bit of a recap. Week 1, I was talking about some of my frustrations as being a newcomer to Alcoholics Anonymous, how it didn't really seem to make an awful lot of sense to me, that the AA meetings that I went to weren't offering me the solution. And I don't mean there were very few people there offering me the solution. What I mean is there weren't any. Now, I stuck around AA long enough to see clusters of people and individuals within certain groups who were carrying the message. And I remember I remember going to a meeting just down the road, and I heard a man speaking, and he's here tonight, but it won't embarrass him. And and I'd been going to this meeting for ages after I'd met my sponsor, and he taught me AA properly from the book. And this man started talking about, you do realize it doesn't say this one day at a time thing in the big book. And I remember nudging my sponsor, going, "Hey, he's a bit like you. He speaks like you." That's how unusual it was for to hear the AA message at the time. And yeah, that line that I like to use, and I think I might have said it last week, I don't know. But imagine if you went to join the National Federation of Stamp Collectors, and you arrived in on your first meeting day one, and you said, "Here, do you mind if we talk about collecting stamps?" They'd probably look at you as if you're a horse booking a holiday. And like, well, what else do you think we do here? We just, and then you got the guy who turns up and says, "Well, I want to talk about my book collection or my record collection." Noble hobbies that they are, they would be moved to one side and told that maybe this is not the right place for you. So the other thing that sort of stood out to me from my memory of last week's workshop, again with my the tone that I was taking was one of lament, that I again make no apology for. Looked at that little graphic that I took from AA's website that shows the stats showing membership growth, which plateaued in around the 90s and around 2 million, but also showed the quantity of groups growing, and the quantity of groups continued to grow, but the membership didn't. Isn't that weird? Tell you why it's weird to a guy like me, because my understanding is one guy meets another guy. I'm saying guy, it could be girl, but I'm saying guy for convenience. One guy meets another guy, sponsors him. Then you got two guys who sponsor people. The people that they sponsor more people. Hey presto, you now have a group. So groups come as the result of 12-step work. So this idea of, I don't like this group anymore, or I've got a resentment against somebody, I'm going to go and start another group. It's not really the thing. It doesn't really make an awful lot of sense to the goals of Alcoholics Anonymous, which in my understanding is to rid the world of alcoholism one drunk at a time. And this very, very clear understanding that my job is to sit at this table, either face to face or using this particular format that we've got so used to now, with another man working through the program. Just one word at a time, one line at a time, one paragraph at a time, one page at a time. And it just, as I'm saying that, I'm thinking of that paragraph at the end of the forward to the third edition, which reads, "In spite of the great increase in the size and the span of this fellowship, at its core it remains simple and personal. Each day, somewhere in the world, recovery begins when one alcoholic talks with another alcoholic, sharing experience, strength, and hope." Okay, so we're very, very clear as to what it is we have to do, aren't we? So our job is to share our experience, strength, and hope. Now, not just random experience, strength, and hope, but as it relates to the program of Alcoholics Anonymous. And we'll have a look at where it says that within our literature very, very shortly as well. Okay, so shall we start doing some work on the traditions? Because I guess that's why everybody's here. Probably thinking he's going to moan again for a third week. I can't promise I won't moan, but I'll try and keep it to a minimum. All right, so what are the traditions and where did they come from? This is just by way of recap again. If we look at the forward to the second edition, which I think is a really, really handy little whistle-stop tour of how Alcoholics Anonymous came about. There are 3 official history books. If you want to get stuck into them, I highly recommend you do. Context is useful. My favorite is Alcoholics Anonymous Comes of Age. There's also Pass It On. They look quite similar, but it's a different name. And then Dr. Bob and the Good Old Timers. So go ahead and read those. There's some good stuff in them. If you only want to read one of the history books, I like Comes of Age the best, but that's just a personal opinion. They're all grand. But if you can't be arsed and just want to find out the information briefly, then I would suggest that even reading the forward to the second edition from the book Alcoholics Anonymous, it doesn't take too long. And picking up at the end, or the middle rather, of Roman numerals 18. And I talked about this, I think, on week one. This is so John D. Rockefeller giving this dinner, and so that, word of that got out. Next thing, this chap called Jack Alexander wrote this article, this newspaper article, the Saturday Evening Post. So the thing about it was, though, Jack Alexander wasn't the sort of guy you want to be writing articles on you. He was like an expose journalist. He would go in and find scandals and corruptions and whatever. And he sort of figured out this Alcoholics Anonymous crowd looked a wee bit fishy to me. And he went in there with a viewpoint to finding what the hell the boys were up to, so he could write this expose on it. Next thing, he writes this article, this glowing article. He turned up there, seen some of his fellow journalists were there. He was invited in. Nothing was hidden from him. And he could see there was no profit motive, and there's people getting sober, and, medical science was being defied. If you ever get the chance to read it, give it a good read. It's really interesting. And it talks about an Alcoholics Anonymous where the recovered guys just talk very, very bluntly and directly to the newcomers about the hopelessness of their condition. It's a really, really nice read. But anyway, nonetheless, boom, this mushrooming process then happened. And then Alcoholics Anonymous went into this period of rapid growth. Now, anyone here who's got any experience in business will know that rapid growth of that pace is really not good for business. Now, I'm a marketeer and a salesman. I had to learn this quite early on in my business career, because I was like, sell, it'll be fine, just keep selling stuff. It wasn't fine. And my first business went out of business very, very quickly because it was doing well. Figure that out. But that's a lesson that I had to learn. And a similar kind of thing happened with Alcoholics Anonymous, because there was a cluster of them. How many was it exactly? I think it was 800. And then all of a sudden it was 8,000. So that's chaos. That is absolute chaos. There's lack of resources, there's lack of staff, and these groups were springing up all over the place. You'd have one group where, they came from a place where they were using the Bible, like historically they're from the Oxford groups. There's a bunch of guys still using the Bible. There's other bunch of guys that gone a different direction. And then one message was one way, another message was the other way. They also had a huge amount of rules. So in group one, you'd have 10 different rules for membership, and in group two you'd have another 10, but they were different. And if you put all these rules together, it would be impossible to be a member of Alcoholics Anonymous. So all of this was going on. So I guess it was, from my understanding, the awareness of this was driven by a chap called Earl T, and who was lobbying Bill to, we need to get this sorted. We need to codify something to help us get a grip of this. And picking up at the bottom of that page, our society then entered a fearsome and exciting adolescent period. The test that it faced was this: could these large numbers of erstwhile erratic alcoholics successfully meet and work together? Would there be quarrels over membership, leadership and money? Would there be strivings for power and prestige? Would there be schisms which would split AA apart? Do you see any of that stuff happening these days? Except all of it. I guess there's one fundamental difference that I could see, though, is that everybody was running whenever they realized that. I don't mean they're actually running, but there was a sense of urgency. There was a blue light response to this. Like, man, this is like this. We need to fix this. Soon AA was beset by these very problems, and in every side and in every group. But out of this frightening and at first disrupting experience, the conviction grew that AAs had to hang together or die separately. We had to unify our fellowship or pass off the scene. Why did they think that? Why did they think we need to find ways to stop this chaotic mess that was starting to brew? Why did they think if they didn't do that, we'd pass off the scene? Well, they were aware of the history of the Oxford groups, whose successes within this field had dwindled so much. Then there was the story of the Washingtonians that we'll go into more whenever we look at Tradition 5, but a bunch of guys meeting in a bar in Baltimore, and then they decided that fellowship was a good idea, and then it established principles by which people could get and stay sober. And part of that was passing the message to other alcoholics. And, they looked very, very much like us. And then they got involved in all these other things, and the whole thing just fell apart. There was enough historical evidence to suggest that if we don't sort this out, we will fall apart. I don't see enough of concern about that. I know very, very few people who attend conference at the moment. Now, there may well be loads, but I don't know too many people who attend conference who even understand the traditions and the concepts well enough to represent this group whenever they go. Isn't that a bit of a worry? And the biggest worry is there isn't that panic of, oh my God, what do we do? There's a there's a city in Great Britain that I'm very, very close to, whose intergroup's about to collapse because they can't get people to turn up in it. So they're just sending people that haven't got a clue what they're doing and don't know anything about traditions and concepts or whatever, thinking that that's the solution to the problem. How the hell is that a solution to the problem? This is urgent. This is a panic. What these guys then did is they established, goes on in the next paragraph, to establish the 12 traditions. And what happened was, there was a Grapevine magazine, April 1946, called The 12 Suggested Points for AA Tradition, also been called The 12 Points to Secure AA's Future, that details these 12 traditions, and then explanations about each and every one of those traditions was dropped in on a monthly basis thereafter. And Chris, I sent you a text with those Grapevine magazine articles because I was trying to put them in the chat. I didn't know how to. Maybe you'd be more successful at that, so we can share them with the group of people who have attended, but they're also each to be found in the language of the heart as well. And so that's the main source of the traditions that I'm going to refer to. They're to be found in the history books as well. There's also the 12 Steps and 12 Traditions book, the first half of which I'm not hugely familiar with, but the second half has a lot of information that may well help to add context to what we're going to discuss tonight. So, where can I find the 12 traditions outlined nice and simply? Well, on your walls of your AA group, maybe. But on the big book on page 562 and 563, continuing on to 564, you have the short form of the 12 traditions and then the long form of the 12 traditions. The long form came first, and we will be referring to the long form almost exclusively because the short form's purpose is simply to fit on the wall beside the 12 steps. So they're heavily abbreviated, sometimes to the point of extreme misunderstanding. We'll talk more about that when we get to Tradition 3. I have an awful lot of fun with that one. And bizarrely, on Tradition 2, the short form is longer than the long form. Anyway, only in Alcoholics Anonymous. But that's where you will find the traditions. And if you can't be bothered studying any of this stuff because you're inherently lazy, a bit like myself, you know what? If you read the long form and take it incredibly literally, it's my experience that you're probably not going to be too far off. So maybe that's a good place to make a start. Okay, shall we talk about Tradition 1? I guess that would make sense with it being the first one. So, all right, let's read them first of all. In the short form, our common welfare should come first. Personal recovery depends upon AA unity. In the long form, our AA experience has taught us that each member of Alcoholics Anonymous is but a small part of a great whole. AA must continue to live, or most of us will surely die. Hence, our common welfare comes first, but individual welfare follows close afterward. So, I don't know, I guess in order for that tradition to make sense to me, I would need to understand what AA is. So if we're talking about AA unity, what does that mean? What is AA? Around what are we unifying? So the stamp collector lads who I made reference to earlier, and the name of the organization that I made reference to that collect stamps was one that I completely made up. If they happen to exist, that's completely coincidental. But they unify around the collecting of stamps. So this word unity, in my view and in my experience, is often misunderstood as being this kind of I better not say anything that people don't want to hear because I don't want to disrupt the unity of Alcoholics Anonymous, meaning that I can't have an opposing view to people in the rooms at business meetings, or I can't object to something, or I can't raise an idea in case it's controversial, and this weird thing about how we avoid controversy inside AA, which of course is a nonsense. And I don't know where this comes from, but the point that I'm going to try and illustrate here is that what we're actually talking about is unity, meaning that we unify around a common purpose. How do we arrive at that? Okay, well, let's have a look at page 17 in the big book. I'm not looking at my screen now because I'm looking up, but I bet you everybody's nodding, going, yeah, I bet you would take us to page 17. It's just so obviously about tradition one that it's just, to think otherwise is insane. And so it's the start of there is a solution. The title there is a solution to me is an incredible one, and the two words in the middle are the pertinent ones. The affirmative of is, and then a singular solution. Alcoholics Anonymous doesn't have a cluster of different solutions. There is a solution. Where it says we have Alcoholics Anonymous, so the we within that is not me. It's not the guys in the room whenever I come in. Ask me if I'm prepared to go to any lengths to have what they have. Obviously I wasn't. It refers to the first 100 writers of the book Alcoholics Anonymous. So whenever it comes to question time, if you're going to debate with me whether there was actually 100 or if that was an exaggeration, I'm out of that debate. We all know that Bill was a marketeer. But the point being, it's the initial writers of the book. So we, the initial writers of this book, knew thousands of men and women who were once just as hopeless as Bill. Nearly all have recovered. They have solved the drink problem. Isn't that great? We are average Americans. Well, they were. All sections of this country and many of its occupations are represented, as well as many political, economic, social, and religious backgrounds. We are people who normally would not mix. But there exists among us a fellowship, a friendliness, and an understanding which is indescribably wonderful. We are like the passengers of a great liner the moment after rescue from shipwreck, when camaraderie, joyousness, and democracy pervade the vessel from steerage to captain's table. Unlike the feelings of the ship's passengers, however, our joy and escape from disaster does not subside as we go our individual ways. So I've never been in a shipwreck. I bet you there's, how many people are here? 74. I bet you there's not one of you guys has been in a shipwreck. If there was, send me a message because I'd love to hear about it. But I can imagine how shitty that would be. But I also imagine if I arrived on the shore, I would be embracing the person standing beside me. I wouldn't be questioning the color of their skin or their sexual preference or their gender, or whether that's even a word that we should be using these days, around which I get quite confused. And it wouldn't be a thing. Yeah, I wouldn't be interested in anything other than, isn't this amazing that we escaped? Isn't that just the best thing ever? And my friend Chris, whose shirt you heard me abusing earlier, is a very different man to me, but he's just so the same. My friend Tom is a very different man to me. My friend Elaine, Patsy, my new friend Chris, these are all people who are different to me in many different respects, none of which I see, none of which I'm even aware of. You guys heard me talking about Brendan, who was one of the co-founders of this group along with me. It was 2 years into our relationship before I found out what he did for a living. It's either that or I'm just too selfish to give a monkeys. But the point being, we're just wrapped up in this whole thing, this joyous environment in which we find ourselves. And what is that? It says the feeling of having shared in a common peril is one element of the powerful cement which binds us. So one element of this fellowship is the common peril. Roseanne and Mayo, I don't know you, but I bet that if you took alcohol into your system in any form, something would happen in both the bodily and mental sense that would make it virtually impossible for you to quit alcohol. Cal, does that happen to you? Laws? Alfred, I know it happens to you. Antonio, I'm certain it happens to you. Amy, without a doubt. So that is a peril that I share with every single one of you. Is it a peril I share with everybody who comes to Alcoholics Anonymous? We'll maybe talk about that when we get to tradition 2. But this work on the assumption, for the sake of this project, that is the case, and I'll dismiss it whenever we get to the next week. But the point being that part of what holds us together is that we are the same in that respect. And you know that part in the doctor's opinion where it lists all the different types of alcoholics? And then it goes on to say, you know what, doesn't actually really matter, because what really matters is that All of these and many others have one symptom in common. They cannot start drinking without developing the phenomenal craving. So if you got that, you're the same as me. I don't care if you're older than me, younger than me, better looking than me. The latter is probably highly probable. But the point being, we're still the same. Now, that is one of the components that holds us together. The tremendous fact for every one of us is that we have a common solution. Sorry, it says before that, but that in itself would never have held us together as we are now joined. So as amazing as it is that we have this common illness, if we all met on a cancer ward, I guess we would have that same, isn't that cool that we're the same and we're all in this together kind of thing. But it says, but that would never have held us together as we are not joined, or now joined. There's currency, there's utility, and there's value to that, but that's not enough, is what my book says. The tremendous fact for every one of us is we have discovered a common solution. So the great fact and then the tremendous fact. So isn't it great that we all have the same illness and we're able to come together? Yes, but what really holds us together is that we have the solution that we all agree on. And this is where we start having a look at AA unity, and this is where I start getting a wee bit wobbly. Goes on to say we have a way out in which we can absolutely agree. Do we? And upon which we can join in brotherly and harmonious action. But what is this thing around which we all agree? This is the great news this book carries to those who suffer from alcoholism. The thing around which in Alcoholics Anonymous there is no basis for argument is that the program of recovery is the 12 steps as outlined in the book Alcoholics Anonymous. That is a fact. That is something that cannot be changed. That is etched in the very fabric of our society. If we have a look at the very, very start in the title page of the book, Alcoholics Anonymous, then it goes on to tell us what that is. The story of how many thousands of men and women have recovered from alcoholism is referring to this book. And if you look through the history books that I mentioned there, the lads were aware of some of these problems that were going to come along. And they started talking about how we needed to write the AA message down, because through time these guys might make a balls of it. Specifically it says things like, and pass it on by setting forth a clear statement of recovery. A book can prevent distortion of the message. It was, the AA message, like what AA is, was put into a book so that we don't distort it. But we find a way to distort it just by not reading the bastard. They also said in AA comes of age above anything else that was going on. We would have to put our message down on paper. Excuse me. We'd have to put our message down on paper. A book of experiences could carry our message to places we could never visit. Moreover, such a book could prevent the inevitable garble and distortion that would start as publicity came. So the first priority to these guys, once they established a program of recovery, and can you even imagine how difficult that was? So a bunch of guys from 1935 right up to 1939, they're kind of winging it a wee bit, taking the essence of what they learned from the Oxford groups. They dropped from the 6 tenets of the Oxford groups, they dropped one of them, the complete deflation, and then they started building in what Bill Wilson had learned from Dr. Silkworth and expanded upon that, and then come up with the 12 steps that they kind of laboured about with, and tried things, and a couple of people had to die, and certainly a lot of people got drunk again, and eventually they all came together and said, right, have we got it now? Yeah, we got it. This divinely inspired masterpiece. Right, what are we going to do? We need to write this shit down because we're continuing to grow. There's more and more people coming on. We're getting into different territories. This is going to get very, very garbled and very, very confusing. So this is the AA message. We'll write it down and then people can come and buy it. And then it means they'll have something to unify around. I want to just refer to the Grapevine magazine article that touched on. I'm into week 3 now. You think I'd remember how to do this? Is that the one? Okay, give me a second. Got it. So this is the Grapevine magazine. Can you see that? Okay. That covers Tradition 1. So this was launched in December 1947. And I've highlighted this part here. Our whole AA program is securely founded on the principle of humility. That is to say, perspective, which implies, among other things, that we relate ourselves rightly to God and to our fellows, that we each see ourselves as we really are, a small part of a great whole. Seeing our fellows thus, we shall enjoy group harmony. That is why AA tradition can confidently state our common welfare comes first. Yeah, look, all this talk of humility. It it reminds me that it's safe to say that the whole purpose of the 12 traditions is to protect you from me. Because I'm not going to lie to you, I could come up with a better way than the 12 steps. I could definitely come up with a better way than the 12 traditions, and I have done in my head 1,000 times. It's just the nature of who I am. I know that it's not real, and I know that it's probably not better, but that's the way my mind works. And there's a very, very big chance that left unchecked, if I didn't work the program and continue to work the program and remain accountable to a sponsor and a group of people around me, whatever, I might turn up at business meetings saying absurd things with great ideas and crazy ideas and say things like, well, in my opinion, or, you know, in Alcoholics Anonymous, we don't say in our opinion we're clever, we say in my experience, meaning in my opinion. And, I could start doing stuff like that. But that neglects to make the point and to realize the point that it's not about me. It is not about what I think is a good idea, because what I think is a good idea today, I'll probably change my mind tomorrow. But, and we'll talk more about this on tradition too, but whenever there is a conscience that comes together to come up with the right ideas, my job is to fall in line with that, whether I think it's a good idea or not. It's not about, okay, this is the best idea because I think it's the best idea. It's just like, well, this is where we're at. But the one thing that's not open for dispute is that we are here to unify around the program of Alcoholics Anonymous, which is within the big book. So if I arrive at a meeting and I do not see the big book being used, and I do not see the big book and sponsorship being offered to a new person, that to me is not Alcoholics Anonymous. It can be an Alcoholics Anonymous group only by virtue of a right to be wrong. Who wants to be a member of a group that's only a group by virtue of a right to be wrong? Not me. I want you to take a look at this little graphic that I really like. It's in the... Again, I don't know how to do this. There it is. It's in the 12 Traditions Illustrated pamphlet. Are you guys familiar with this little pamphlet? Now, before you tell me that the Alcoholics Anonymous in the United Kingdom, or the GB, no longer circulates this, I was made aware of that quite recently, much to my shock. The reason being that there's some images in it that are considered not politically correct. I neither agree nor disagree. I don't have an opinion on that, but I think it's outrageous that rather than amending it and keeping it in circulation, simply took it away as if it didn't matter. Because an easy way of talking about the traditions to me is a very, very good idea. And this lovely little picture, a series of pictures and easy explanation around the traditions. If you're in GB and you want to get hold of one of these, just send me a message. I'll email you the PDF or where to find it, because it's really useful. And certainly if they can find ways to change the images in line with what their goals are in that respect, I can see how that could probably be a good thing. But have a look at these guys across the top. So there's somebody drowning. And our book makes this reference of, we sought the same escape with the desperation of a drowning man. So here you have this person drowning, and then you have at the front my mate Chris, and then you've got Maria, and then you've got Antonio, and then you've got Mags, and all these people in the line, and the gentleman with the fuzzy hair towards the back of the screen. That's me, and I'm now thinking I've got a better idea, and I let my hand go. Because I'm just here to fly my own kite and to perpetuate my own ego and talk about how I'm clever. And I turn up at the meeting and I maybe don't want to talk about the big book. I maybe read a book recently about the latest German spiritualist who's come up with some stuff about the present moment. And I want to talk about that, and I'm essentially letting go of this line of people who are standing shoulder to shoulder to pull this person out of the water. That's not what this is about. It's not about what I think. It's not about whether the book that I read last night's a good book or not. It may well be and it may well not be. But my job whenever I turn up in Alcoholics Anonymous is to talk about the Alcoholics Anonymous program of recovery and nothing else. It is most certainly not to take that poor drowning person's time and talk to them about how shit my life is today. And talk about how my wife doesn't give me a kiss on the cheek anymore. And,
language.
And various other things that will come out of my mouth. My watch keeps interrupting us. I'm not going to wear it next week. But, it's not to come there for any purpose other than to be part of this chain. Look at this guy here on the tree looking down below. So there's all these people in a row. And all it takes is one of us. All it takes is one of us to break the chain and decide I'm doing my own thing. Of course, we're welcome to do our own thing, but pack your bags and go and do it somewhere else. Like, does that sound too harsh? Does it? I wonder, and it's not that I give a shit, but, I wonder, does it sound too harsh? Because, I guess that, do you know what I find really harsh? I find it really harsh that if a friend of mine goes into Alcoholics Anonymous, I get really nervous, wondering if they've gone into a place that will actually freaking offer them Alcoholics Anonymous. Do you know what I find really harsh? That alcoholics are dying all over the place, and all we need to do is get on the same page. We have to unify. Our fellowship has to unify, or we will pass off the scene. It is that simple. Now, the retort to that, I was doing this workshop for a group in Edinburgh a number of years ago, something similar to this, and the retort was, well, they didn't pass off the scene though, did they? Really? Has Alcoholics Anonymous not passed off the scene? I certainly believe that Alcoholics Anonymous exists in these little small cluster groups. But, I use the term mainstream AA, and I mean it in a really derogatory way, because the majority of AA has most certainly passed off the scene. The majority of AA that I can see, maybe it's different in your jurisdiction, don't use the big book. Don't talk about the big book. And do not talk about the traditions of Alcoholics Anonymous. Do not share in the traditions of Alcoholics Anonymous within their business meetings. I wanted, as part of this workshop, to continue to bring us back to this graphic here. And I'm going to endeavor to bring up. Okay, so that's the wrong button. Yes, I'm nailing this now. So you'll see that what you have there is the 12 traditions laid out in a row. And on one side, you have tradition 1, which we just spoke about. On the other side, you have tradition 12. So tradition 1 is the purpose, unity. We need to unify around Alcoholics Anonymous. Alcoholics Anonymous is a book. Alcoholics Anonymous is the program. We need to unify around that, just like the stamp collecting guys unify around collecting bloody stamps. And then at the other side of this, you have tradition 12. We're going to talk about now very, very briefly, which is anonymity, the method by which we unify around the big book. And for every tradition that we look at the end of it, we're going to say, now do we understand how with tradition 2, 3 or 4, whatever, we find unity by the application of tradition 12. And we're going to keep seesawing back and forward between the two, because actually it's nearly 1:15, Chris. Do you have time to go into 12 for 5 minutes?
We have much time.
Is that okay? All right. So tradition 12. All right. So look, let's read it just really quickly, first of all. And I guess I promised not to allow myself to be rushed, but hey-ho, it is what it is. The short form of anonymity, see what happens whenever I'm rushed. Right, okay, I'm going to slow down. Anonymity is the spiritual foundation of all our traditions, ever reminding us to place principles before personalities. Have you ever heard that misquoted, I wonder? Long form, our AA experience has taught us that, and finally, we of Alcoholics Anonymous believe that the principle of anonymity is an immense spiritual significance. It reminds us that we are to place principles before personalities, that we're actually to practice a genuine humility. This to the end that our great blessings may never spoil us, that we shall forever live in thankful contemplation of him who presides over us all. So, principles before personalities. What does that mean? What does it mean to place principles before personalities? Well, this define the words, first of all. And I guess the best way to do that, in my humble opinion, is to have a look at what the principles actually are. Okay. There you have it. There's the AA logo, which has unity, service, recovery. So the principles that are attached to recovery are the 12 steps. The principles attached to unity are the 12 traditions. The principles attached to service are the 12 concepts. So whenever we say principles before personalities, we don't mean some random principles that you've just dreamt up, or your principles as a whatever. We're talking specifically about the 36 principles of Alcoholics Anonymous. And then whenever it talks about anonymity, it's basically inviting me to step back in favor of the principles. Am I putting the principles before my personality? So am I saying things like, well, I think this and I think that? Or am I saying, in accordance to tradition, whatever, I believe X, Y, Z? Or like it says in the big book or whatever, am I referring to the Alcoholics Anonymous principles, or am I relying on my own personality? Because whenever we unify around the principles, our own personality just drifts into the background. How can I do this real quick? Okay, well, look, let's have a look at this part in AA Comes of Age, page 131 on this particular point, where Bill Wilson writes, in my belief, the entire future of our fellowship hangs upon this vital principle. If we continue to be filled with the Spirit and practice of anonymity, no shoal or reef can wreck us. If we forget this principle, the lid of Pandora's box will be off, and spirits of money, power, prestige will be losing among us. Obsessed by these genii, we might well founder and break up. I devoutly believe this will never happen. No AA principle, God, he's wrong about that. No AA principle merits more study and application than this one, as I do it really quickly. I am positive that AA's anonymity is a key to long-time survival. The spiritual substance of anonymity is sacrifice. Anonymity is about sacrifice. Now, it's not about privacy. I hear this coming up all the time, where the word anonymity has been used instead of privacy. There's a conversation to be had about privacy that we'll have on Traditional 11. But what we're talking about here is the spiritual principle of anonymity, which is the laying aside of my personality and my personal viewpoints in exchange for promoting the principles of Alcoholics Anonymous. Just like I said before, I have much better ideas than Alcoholics Anonymous have ever come up with before. That's just the sort of jackass that I am. But I don't mention them. I try not to mention them. I rephrase, I try to focus on what the principles would have me promote. Just to further this point slightly, I'll go back to some, where is it? Some banned bootleg literature from GB, the illustrated pamphlet. And we'll skip down to the Tradition 12 part there, where it's talking about, so you see this graphic here, on this building, anonymity, sacrificing personal ambition for the common good. The guy with the saw at the side of the tree going, I don't care, I've got my own fucking ideas, I'm here to talk about me. You know what? You're just going to bring everything down. So we unify around the program, and we do that through the method of anonymity, which is the placing of principles before personality. Not any random ass principles, but the principles of Alcoholics Anonymous. If at your business meeting you're not able to tether it to a principle, please shut the hell up. Unless you're a newcomer, say whatever the hell you want. And on that cheerful note, I'll leave it, Chris. I'm sorry for running over, but thanks very much, everyone.